So tomorrow is World CML Day, always on the 22nd of September. And it's important that we're also gathered here today to play our part in improving the profile of CML in the UK. Also a warm welcome to those joining us on the webcast. If you're not here in person, this is where we are today. I'm very grateful to the team at the Royal Armouries in Leeds Museum. I've seen the docks and the water. I haven't seen the elephant yet. Everyone's welcome to have a wander in the museum if they would like to. If you have come in person and you came by train, there is a water taxi service back to the station. I understand it takes about 15 minutes for a princely sum of £1, so look out for the water taxis. So this day needs sponsorship to be able to take place, and we're extremely grateful to our pharmaceutical sponsors, Bristol Myers Squibb, Pfizer and Incyte. We're also indebted to the administrative team at the University of Glasgow and to Sandy and David at CML Support. And also the Tai Chi Tigers. We have Marsha here from Tai Chi Tigers, who is one of my leukemia patients in Halifax. And she is a glowing endorsement for the power of a calm mind and a healthy body. And she's very kindly going to do some Tai Chi taster drop-in over lunchtime and perhaps afterwards as well. It's entirely voluntary, but you'd be very welcome to join us. So we have 4 professors speaking today. We have consultant colleagues from the CML working group, and I'm very pleased that we also have our nurses and patients' involvement in the talks today. We've aimed to have a combination of talking about the medical aspects, but also talking about the practicalities of living with leukemia. We'd like this to feel friendly, quite informal, very pleased to take questions. In this morning's first session, we'll have 4 talks followed by time for questions after all 4 are completed, and after that, questions as we go along. At the end of the day, we have a session where there will be a panel and you have the opportunity to ask further questions on any of the topics. And we also have space to talk about some case stories. So if you have a case story that you think would be interesting for us all to hear, either talking in person or I can present on your behalf, please come and find me during one of the breaks. It is important to have your feedback. We really want to keep these meetings interesting and relevant to you, so please complete the evaluation forms for us. So I would like to start. Just find my talk. Sorry, apologies. Get it to the beginning. Okay, so I'm starting off with the basics. What is CML? I'll talk a little bit about the definitions and the words that we use, talk about the biology of how chronic myeloid leukemia arises, and also a bit about the impact that it can have to be living with leukemia. So, first of all, the terminology of CML, and starting with the word leukemia, because many patients tell me that when they're sat down and first told their diagnosis, all they hear and remember is that word leukemia. We tend to connect it with images from the media of people who look very poorly often, perhaps children, people who've lost their hair, images that really are very worrying. Leukemia actually means white blood, and essentially it's a cancer that comes from the body's white cells that instead of just responding to infections, start to develop and over-proliferate because they're not being regulated properly. But as you know, leukemia comes in many shapes and sizes. Certainly the acute leukemia that we just mentioned, but the chronic leukemia that you are all much more familiar with. And the word chronic meaning long-lasting over time. But there is potential for chronic leukemia to change its spots and turn into an acute leukemia. So what do we mean by the word myeloid? So I have to take you back to medical school physiology class for this. And we start off with what's called a pluripotent stem cell. So these are the cells in the bone marrow that have the ability to make copies of themselves and keep our blood system running right throughout our lives. But as well as that, they can start to specialise, and they can follow a program to take them down into either a myeloid stem cell or a lymphoid stem cell. And then each of these cells in turn can specialise again into all the blood cells at the bottom there that we have circulating in our blood. So the myeloid compartment is where we have problems with CML, and these are the cells that proliferate in the blood and bone marrow. So some facts and figures. These are taken from the Cancer Research website. Around 750 or so new cases each year in the UK, and it only constitutes less than 1% of all the cancer cases in the UK. The chances of developing CML does just increase year on year with age, but overall we have been able to measure that the trend of new cases of CML has reduced over the last couple of decades. So how does CML develop? CML is caused by an alteration in the DNA structure to make a new gene called BCR-ABL1. DNA, as you know, is our inherited blueprint that tells our cells how to develop, and the information of the DNA is contained in segments called genes. In turn, our genes code for the proteins, which are the workers that carry out the functions of the cells. The DNA is packaged into threads called chromosomes, and we inherit one set from each parent, so our chromosomes are in pairs. And in CML, it's chromosome 9 and chromosome 22 that are involved. So what happens is called a translocation, and this is where part of each chromosome breaks off and then rejoins to make a new chromosome called the Philadelphia chromosome. We don't know why this happens for most people. The translocation involves moving the ABL gene and the BCR gene and putting them together to form this new fusion gene called BCR-ABL. This gene in turn will encode for the BCR-ABL protein, which is called a tyrosine kinase, and it's a signal that gets the myeloid cells to proliferate. But knowing BCR-ABL exists from all the scientific research that's gone before, we now have a target, and it's the magic bullet, starting with imatinib, that now gives us the scope to treat this condition and get rid of the BCR-ABL protein and bring down the white cells in the blood. So in this schema, this is a normal cell with ABL and BCR in their correct locations, but in a leukemic cell, we have the BCR-ABL on the Philadelphia chromosome, and this will then have an advantage and overgrow and occupy more of the bone marrow. As our drugs come in and move into all the cells, they will preferentially get rid of the leukemic cells and allow the normal cells to recover. So many of you may have had a bone marrow test, which gives us precise diagnostics under the microscope, but in many cases we can see the CML just in the blood. So the blood test from your GP that then goes to the hospital, the cells are counted and spread on slides and stained, and then we can look at them down the microscope. And instead of seeing normal blood up at the top there with red cells and some healthy looking white cells, we see far too many white cells and different shapes and sizes because we now have more primitive cells from higher up in that tree diagram that are spilling out into the blood. As you learn and read more about CML, I'm sure you've heard about stages and scores. Most patients are diagnosed in chronic phase, so the blood and bone marrow are over-proliferating, but it's moving at a relatively slow pace. But chronic myeloid leukemia, as you know, can become more aggressive and move through an accelerated phase where we see more and more of those very early cells at the top of the tree diagram. And when these start to predominate, we move into blast crisis, which is the same thing really as acute leukemia. We use some scoring systems when people are diagnosed that involve measurements such as blood counts or spleen size to calculate the risk of these events occurring. And you may have heard about scoring systems such as the SOCOS score or ALTS. So the symptoms of CML are very variable, and there may be none at all, and some people are diagnosed as a finding from a blood count done for completely different reasons. If the white cell count is going high, the blood can become quite thick, and that can cause symptoms such as headache or blurred vision. Equally, if the red cells are falling, symptoms of fatigue or shortness of breath can predominate. If the platelets, the clotting cells, fall down, then bruising or bleeding can occur. And if the spleen starts to enlarge, this can cause abdominal pain or swelling. Bone pain, night sweats, fatigue, weight loss are also part of the picture that some people experience. So in terms of talking about the impact of CML, I thought it would be a good idea to listen directly to one CML patient who is actually here being interviewed by another. I'll just see if we can get this clip loading. So I first heard this on the radio driving to work. I don't know if any of you listen to Radio 5 Live. I find the sports coverage gives a bit of a break from Brexit, which is quite welcome. And one of their young reporters, Chris Latcham, has recently been diagnosed with CML. He's a chap in his early 30s. And in quite a charmingly low-key way, he does introduce this from time to time into his broadcasting or his Twitter feed. He has issued a nice video clip encouraging particularly young people who might ignore their symptoms to get checked, because he himself said that his tiredness he just put down to getting up at the crack of dawn for the breakfast show. He ignored his symptoms for quite a while. So he's raising awareness of people seeking early diagnosis. But he conducted this interview with a chap called Roman Reigns, who I hadn't heard of, but he has worldwide fame, I understand, as a wrestling superstar based in the States. And Roman was diagnosed with CML some 11 years ago or so. I don't know the exact details of his treatment, but I understand that he went into remission for many years. But his CML recurred at the end of last year, needing him to start medication again, so he felt he had to lay down his belt and stop wrestling. So the beginning of this clip is Chris Latcham speaking to Roman about announcing his diagnosis to the world. And I hope it will play.
It was a night of mixed emotions, you know. On one hand, I was terrified, you know, because I'm sharing this news with the whole world. A huge wave of opinions and, you know, criticism I knew was going to be coming my way. But on the other hand, I was excited to finally be able to share, you know, this huge part of me, something I've kind of held as a secret. And to be honest, once I made the announcement, once I felt the crowd, and then on top of that, once the night was over and then I got the feedback through the social media, Twitter, Instagram, all the above, the outpour of love and support is what really, you know, made it known to me that this was the right thing to do.
It's the second time you've gone through this process. First time was a decade or so ago when you were just starting out trying an NFL career with the Minnesota Vikings. It must have been completely different being a younger man who wasn't as successful at that stage. How different was it?
It's totally different. I didn't have any money. I didn't have a job. I was, you know, aspiring to be an NFL football player. On top of I was chasing a very physical job. And with all that happening, my wife was pregnant. That was a time where I felt like I was on an island. I felt like CML, leukemia, was going to take my life. It was whether I survived or not, I wasn't going to be able to do the things that I wanted to do. I wasn't going to be able to achieve the goals that I had set out to do since I was just a little boy. So for me, I was very bitter. But I kept it in.
The good news is I'm in remission, y'all.
What advice would you have for anyone in the situation where they feel like they're kind of drowning?
When you're drowning, you want to reach out to people, and a lot of times you can pull them down. You can be a hindrance to another person, but this is a different type of water. this is one of those places the more the merrier. The bigger the support system, I don't think you can ever have too much help. I don't think your support system can be too great. I don't think you can ever share your story too much. As long as it's reaching out to someone, as long as it's helping somebody, as long as it's giving someone just a little tear of hope, as long as somebody can read into what's going on with you and they can look at that and say, maybe I can make it too.
Okay. So some themes come out there that may strike a chord. Certainly these initial feelings of shock, feelings of loss, that perhaps the future isn't going to pan out as planned. Worry about the impact on people around you. The backlash that Roman was talking about came in the form of social media criticism that he looked so well that perhaps he wasn't a cancer patient after all. Perhaps could this even be fake? And moving on with CML and living with the cancer can have its challenges when outwardly to other people you can look quite well. That has its advantages for carrying on with normal life, but can also have its difficulties. And lastly, the importance of a support network. I thought it was quite poignant to see Chris Latcham asking, what do you do when you feel like you're drowning? That felt like a very personal question from him. And support networks are key. Not everybody is lucky enough to have friends and family, and we try to play our part in that support network as well. So good CML care vitally rests on teamwork. The part I know best, the patient and the doctors, that whole team of doctors, not just your CML consultants, but doctors in other specialties, your GP. It's absolutely vital that we have the science to back this up and the ongoing science and research teams doing all the clever stuff to give us the newer treatments. There's a huge group of people that are behind the scenes for your clinic and hospital stays. This came home to me the other day when a patient came in and complimented our young receptionist, Erin. And she said, he always recognises me, he greets me by name with a smile, and it just makes the whole clinic visit so much nicer. And of course the support network, many of you are here today, families, friends, the charities and the web-based groups. So in summary, chronic myeloid leukemia is a condition where the precise scientific research has led to enormous breakthroughs, unlocking targeted therapies. Our aim has to be trying to live a normal life alongside CML, but this can be challenging. Chronic means we're in it for the long haul, and building mutual trust and understanding relationships is so important. But overall, as we'll be hearing today, there are many reasons to feel positive, and we continue to move forwards towards a goal of cure. So I would like to leave my talk there and to invite our next speaker, who's Dr. Jo Ewing, to talk to us.